Okay, so I'm gonna go through what is actually quite a lot of content, and I'm going to try to do it quite quickly so I stay within my allotted time.
With or without the mic?
With or without the mic? With the mic? Okay.
Just hold it lower.
A bit lower. Okay. Got it. Right. So on this, Paul mentioned about, well, there's this money, this network, called Bitcoin and Ethereum, and then there's the asset class. And there's been a lot of discussion about, like, can we pull the two apart? That kind of deserves a discussion in and of itself, because the aspect of the community that I am in is the one, where there's part of the financial industry that thinks you can kind of pull the two completely apart and you can have a distributed ledger without the cryptocurrency. And there's some kind of wrong-headed thinking on both sides of the fence there. But there is something very important about the thought of trying to pull the two apart. And one of them is the idea of, well, what if we can have distributed consensus solution to the double spending problem that will allow peer-to-peer transfer of cash value, but without the cryptocurrency, without this issuerless digital asset, but instead have fiat currency. And that, of course, is kind of one thread of thinking that has bursted into the scene over the last 2 years, and called asset-backed stablecoins, and et cetera. And my talk is kind of in this space, but I'm going to focus instead of focusing on the technology aspect and talking about stablecoin scene, I'm going to talk about money, because as the title of my talk suggests, why your mental model of money is wrong. There actually is, I've discovered over the years being in this space, most people, money is one of these things where it's like so familiar, everyone thinks they understand it, but actually nobody does. And the mental model that people have of money is actually what most people have of money. If this is a statement to which it doesn't apply to you, great. But I think for most people, the mental model of money revolves around a kind of mental model of physical cash and payments and notes and coins. And this mental model is wrong, and it's wrong in a kind of the earth is flat kind of wrong. And by having the wrong mental model, it kind of prevents us from seeing the underlying significance of what is happening in the banking system and what is happening in the blockchain space and the peer-to-peer internet, and the kind of stuff that Monerium is working on is actually profoundly important and has big implications for not just technology, not just the way that we make payments, but actually our entire monetary order. So I'm going to cover all of that in the next 15 minutes. So this topic starts off by pointing out that there are two types of fiat money. There's central bank money and there's commercial bank money. And the central bank money, it comes in two flavors. There's the banknotes, it's the stuff that you have in your wallet. And there are central bank deposits. And that flavor is something that you can't own. Central bank money, electronic central bank money, is really restricted only to large commercial banks, and there are some exceptions, but not for ordinary people. Another really important property of central bank money is that it's a liability of the central bank, and that means it can't default. Does anyone have an idea of why central bank money can't default?
You can make one.
Oh, that's a good answer. Yeah, sometimes it's like the thought as well, it's because the central bank's really prudent and everything. No, it can't default for the simple reason that they call it seigniorage, or just the simple fact that the liability is not redeemable. So if you go down to the Bank of England and have a reason, an appointment or something, and get past the guy who checks your passport, and you go in this little lobby room, there's a cashier's desk, and you can actually go to the Bank of England, you can give them a £10 note, and you can say, I want to redeem this, and what do they give you back? Another £10 note. So being able to issue a liability that's not redeemable into anything means it's credit risk-free, and that's a really important property of central bank money. The other form of money is the stuff that you can own, is commercial bank money, and that comes in one flavor, which is bank deposit. And it's a liability of some commercial bank, and it can default. And it's an unsecured liability. The money that you have in the bank is a loan to a commercial bank. And why does this matter? Well, I want to tell the story about like why your mental model of money is wrong. I want to start with the mental model of money that everybody has, where it's almost undoubtedly correct, which is, the story of Alice pays Bob. Alice asked Bob the builder to come over, fix a window. Probably a builder that fixed a window for 10 quid, but it's a fictional story. It's Alice in Wonderland. Anyway, so she pays Bob 10 quid. Physical, passes the note over to Bob. Bob is now in possession of the 10 quid, possession and the law of cash, physical cash is ownership. And Alice has just discharged her payment obligation to Bob. Okay, so I think kind of most people's mental model of money and the verbiage that we use to describe electronic, transfers of money is some kind of electronic version of this is what's happening, when you make a payment through the banking system. Yes, it's more complicated. The banks are involved. It's needlessly complicated because of legacy infrastructure and whatnot. But still, this idea, this mental model, that when you perform a bank transfer, that there's this monetary object that's transferring from Alice's bank account to Bob's bank account, is a similar thing that's going on, and that's actually not how it works. And I think the best way to introduce the weirdness, the underlying fundamental weirdness of our fiat monetary order, is through this this court case from 1996, R.V. Prady, and the story here is so there's this guy Prady, and he was a fraudster. So he would forge these documents and go to banks who at the time were offering advances on mortgages, and the bank, because he was quite good at it, the bank would be deceived and transfer money to Prady, who would then go and spend it. And he was eventually caught, and obviously under civil law liable to the defrauded banks, but he was also engaging in fraud. It's a crime, and the Crown prosecution thought they had an open and shut case because all the facts, there was definitely he definitely defrauded a number of banks. He definitely obtained cash from these banks on the basis of that fraud. So he should go to 10 years in prison, as the statute of the Theft Act of 1968 said. But he actually got off. He was not convicted for fraud in this particular case. And why was that? Well, the Theft Act says a person who by any deception dishonestly obtains a property belonging to another. And this is what the Crown prosecution thought. They had this open and shut case because there was definitely deception and dishonesty involved. He definitely, he got money from, the defrauded banks in his bank account. So surely he should be guilty. But the idea of obtaining a property belonging to another, the idea of obtaining property, is actually false in this particular case. So the drafters of this statute also had the wrong mental model of money, and so apparently did the criminal law profession. It just kind of threw the criminal law profession into great consternation of how this can possibly be the case. So I want to kind of run through an explanation of why Prady actually didn't have the bank's property transferred to him and why he wasn't guilty of fraud. And I won't go through all the accounting entries behind this, but basically the story behind Alice pays Bob, but this time through her bank account. And let's just say ABC Bank is Barclays and XYZ Bank is HSBC. And Alice banks with Barclays and Bob banks with HSBC. Bob wants money to show up in his account at HSBC. So what happens is, Alice goes to a bank or online banking, gives us payment instructions with Bob's beneficiary details. And in the first step, Alice's bank account is debited by 10 quid. And HSBC's account at Barclays is credited by 10 quid. And Barclays, record of their cash held, HSBC's, the record of their cash held at Barclays increases by 10 quid. And a deposit liability to Bob of 10 quid is created. Money hasn't transferred yet, though. Like, note what's happened here is that a liability between HSBC and Barclays has been created. HSBC now has a claim on Barclays in favor of 10 quid, and HSBC doesn't want that credit risk. So in the second step, what happens is there is a transfer from Barclays to HSBC of money across the books of the Bank of England. Now, the reality of this story, and if anyone knows how the payments work, they say, well, no, Robert, that's actually not how it works, because there's faster payment service, and it's ACH in the US, and like, yes, but all of those details are irrelevant to this particular stylized example, because in all cases of electronic money transfer between banks, this is the fundamental essence of it. What's happened is a liability that Alice has on Barclays is extinguished. A new liability that HSBC has on Barclays is created. A liability that Bob has on HSBC is created. And the interbank liability between the two banks is extinguished when money transfers not from Barclays agent, but across the books of the Bank of England. So the point is that that money, the transfer of monetary value, in the literal sense of transfer, never actually leaves a given financial institution. When you say that having cash on deposit with a bank is a liability of the bank, we don't mean that there's cash there held in the bank and the bank somehow owes it to you. The money is literally a liability of the bank, and there's no way for it to leave a particular financial institution's balance sheet. So this interlocking nature of debits and credits across financial institutions is how money actually works. And the reason why Prady wasn't convicted of fraud was because the banks actually didn't transfer property to him. Like, let's say that, these fictional names, but let's say that the defrauded bank was Barclays, and Prady was banking at the HSBC. Yes, he defrauded Barclays. He did get value, monetary value, in his account at HSBC, but no claim or property actually transferred from Barclays to Prady. And it's this fundamental weirdness of fiat money and how it works in the fractional reserve banking system, which I think is actually, the significance of that is missed when we talk about digital cash. So if we forget Bitcoin and Ether for a moment, talk about the older form of digital cash, which is this idea that started with David Chaum in the 1990s in DigiCash, was that you have digital fiat money, but it's not account-based money like the stuff you have at the bank. It's got the properties of cash. And of course, because I'm at CoinScrum, I have to give the obligatory Satoshi quote. But in the Bitcoin white paper, we define electronic coin as a chain of digital signatures. That idea of being able to transfer monetary value by a cryptographic signature over the public key of the payee is not just a technologically different payment mechanism that somehow we can do it peer-to-peer, that's cool, if we have a blockchain, we can do it peer-to-peer. But it's actually a fundamentally different form of money. That is like the Alice and Bob story, with Alice paying Bob the 10 quid note. And what does it mean if the end state of the technological movement away from client server to peer-to-peer and the transfer of legal value and crypto value through blockchain-based systems, what does it mean for like the kind of stuff that Monerium and others are working on, of digital cash, digital fiat cash? What does that mean from a macro monetary perspective? So this is a picture of a 19th century banknote, U.S. dollar banknote. It's a private bank. It's not, it's not the Fed on there. There was a time in history where banks would actually issue banknotes, and they would circulate the way that notes and coins, central bank money notes and coins circulate today. Similar story in the UK, but it was banned by Parliament about 100 years earlier to give the Bank of England a monopoly on the issuance of banknotes. But this is a possible end state that you can imagine. You can imagine that the Barclays and the HSBCs and the commercial banks would all issue their own crypto tokens, right? And that would be the way that we get fiat money on the blockchain. I don't think that is correct. For the following reasons, sort of imagine that, we got the Alice and Bob story again, but this time Alice is going to pay through a tokenized commercial bank token. And Bob might be like, well, I don't want that bank's, money. Like it says Northern Rock on it or something. Or I might say, okay, I'll accept it at 80 pence on the pound. So the point here is that the underlying unity, behind fiat currency, dollars, pounds, the idea that a pound is a pound regardless of what bank it's held in. You can go to the ATM or the cash point and you can withdraw 10 quid and the note that you're getting, which is now central bank money rather than commercial bank money, it's all fungible one for one. That all breaks down in a model where we rip out the interbank payment system and that complex set of interconnecting ledgers that I described before. So the point here is that the idea that tokenized digital cash is just about more efficient payment systems and maybe making payments more private and being able to pay peer-to-peer, it's a lot more than that. Because the only way that tokenized fiat cash will actually work is for these things to be fungible and to have commercial bank money issued in a tokenized form would not be. So here's an example of something that is kind of part of the story that I'm trying to tell. So there's something called JP Morgan coin, and I don't think it's trying. I'm not privy to the details of this project. I don't think it's trying to be the digital banknote. I don't know the details about how it works, but we can sort of imagine like this sort of thing happening. There's something about the way that this is described, which is really quite troubling. So we've got like this description of the fortress balance sheet. With our fortress balance sheet, blah, 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 strong balance sheet, a 2.6 trillion balance sheet, JP Morgan will redeem each JPM coin in fiat currency, or in other words, one JPM coin represents $1. So this is the idea of that fundamental unity of fiat currency. And yes, everybody knows that that token will be a liability of JP Morgan, but you've got this $2.6 trillion balance sheet behind, and that's a big number, right? Anyone know why that is something I have a problem with? That 2.6 trillion?
Liability.
It's total assets of total liabilities. So that
Ah, yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So let's try to like what is that? What exactly does that mean? That $2.6 trillion balance sheet? Well, we don't need a Bloomberg terminal or anything. We just go to Yahoo Finance and look up the balance sheet of JP Morgan, and there you see it. There's the 2.6 trillion. It's the total assets. But the balance sheet, of course, is assets and liabilities. And what are the liabilities? That's 2.4 trillion. And that means that's just like 200 billion in equity. And if you kind of do the arithmetic there, that means that an approximately 8% decline in the assets of that institution blows out that equity. And absent having a bailout or recapitalization, would default on the depositors and liability. And that doesn't look like a fortress to me. And I don't think it would look like fortress to a future state of the market where you had lots of these different fiat currency based issuances where the balance sheet of the issuer looked like that. They wouldn't be fungible with each other. So some of the conclusions that are involved in this. One, fiat money is not a monetary object. Only physical notes and coins are a monetary object, but the electronic stuff that you have in the bank isn't. But fiat-denominated digital cash is a monetary object. It is like the notes and coins. And the fungibility of fiat money is tightly coupled with the regime of bank deposit and interbank payment systems. So if you say, well, okay, because of all the technological benefits and utility of peer-to-peer payments and tokenized fiat money, the world's going to move to that. Well, it's only going to move to that if the legal form of that monetary liability is different from the legal form of the monetary liability in the banking system that you have today. I think the underlying conclusion behind this is that if you do think that fiat-based digital cash is something that is going to have legs and take off, it won't be tokenized bank deposit, tokenized commercial bank liabilities. It'll either be a form of central bank digital cash, or a form of what the IMF describes as a synthetic CBDC, which is digital cash issued by an e-money issuer like Monerium that holds its reserve balance, its cash at the central bank, or different legal form, but same concept, a narrow bank, which is a bank that only holds risk-free assets such as central bank money and treasury bills. So that is, that's the conclusion. Hopefully clarified something. Thank you.